Welcome to National Parks Traveler, where we explore the national parks and the issues that involve them.
Have you ever wanted to scratch beneath the surface of a national park and gain a better understanding of the issues the National Park Service is challenged with, or to see what research is being conducted, or understand what goals are being chased? This is Kurt Repenchek, your host at the National Parks Traveler. The staff at Grand Teton National Park just released their 2024 Grand Glimpse of the park and the many issues and challenges park staff and even visitors face. To dive into that report, we're joined today by Grand Teton Superintendent Chip Jenkins. We'll be back in a minute with the superintendent to browse through the Grand Glimpse.
The Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation is the primary nonprofit fundraising partner for the Blue Ridge Parkway. It is made up of people who have a deep love for this majestic road and want to ensure that its natural beauty and the experiences it offers endure for generations to come. Show your appreciation at brpfoundation.org. Smokey's Life. Full of stunning photography and thought-provoking reads, Smokey's Life Journal is a biannual magazine produced by Smokey's Life, formerly the Great Smoky Mountains Association. Members receive it free of charge each spring and fall, and it is available for purchase in retail stores throughout Great Smoky Mountains National Park and online at smokieslife.org. Listener and reader support make the National Parks Traveler possible every day of the year. If you enjoy the Traveler's content, please consider a donation at nationalparkstraveler.org.
Welcome back to the Traveler, Chip.
Hi, Kurt. Glad to be here.
You know, here it is, middle of June. You guys got snow last night. We got 28 degrees here at Park City, Utah. Perfect weather, the way it's supposed to be.
Hey, you know, it's spring in the Rockies, right? So it was shorts weather, and we were out paddling a few days ago and had our down coats on last night. But looks like it's going to be back to paddling weather by this weekend.
Yeah, no, that's great. We were supposed to be up there this past weekend for some paddling, but we put it off till I think late September.
That was actually a smart choice. Saturday and Sunday, it was very, very windy, and conditions were actually kind of dangerous. So,
Yeah, like a challenge,
yeah.
Speaking about challenges, you guys are really drawing in the visitors. I mean, last year, I believe you saw 3.4 million recreation visits, a 22% increase from 2022.
We saw, yes, we had 3.4 million folks who came here. We definitely seeing a rebound after the COVID years and or the dip after the COVID years. And not only are we seeing more people coming over the last decade, but we're also seeing people behave differently. So I think we have seen a 40% increase in the number of people who are on our trails. So you know, people are visiting the park in different ways than they did 10 years ago.
Yeah, and they're also slightly changing the time periods when they're showing up, right?
It does look like our messaging is working, which is you know, an interesting experiment, right? We're encouraging people to try to come earlier or stay later, and that's exactly what we're seeing. But in addition to that, we're also seeing a shift in the time of year when people are visiting. So last year, September, for the first time ever, was actually had more visitation than June.
Wow.
So yeah, so we're seeing we're getting broader shoulders for our shoulder seasons.
How is that affecting your workforce? I know you hire, like most other parks, you hire a lot of seasonal help, but you've got a specific time period that they're on board, right? And if your seasons are getting earlier in the spring and longer in the fall, how are you managing with workforce?
Yep. So we start bringing our summer employees on the last week in April, and they come on in waves up until the first week in June. A big part of that reason is just simply as you know, in April and May, there's still a substantial amount of snow on the ground here. It's still below freezing temperatures. And so we bring people on to help us open up facilities. So they're helping us, the first waves of people coming on, they help us open roads, then they help us get water systems dug out, then they help us open buildings up. But even then, a number of our seasonal housing is not really set up. It's not winterized. So we can't put people in there when we have sub-freezing temperatures. This year, I can tell you, May, I don't have figures yet, but May was very, very busy. And so at the same time that we are doing spring training, employee development opportunities, we were also seeing substantially larger numbers of people coming in May for visits. So it does create stress on the infrastructure. It creates stress on the employees to be able to meet those needs. And we just have to work in terms of calibrating expectations in terms of what we're asking our people to do, as well as also what's open for people to do on the ground.
But with those longer seasons, whether it's earlier in the season or later in the season, um, do you have the workforce to cover everything, all the bases? I know.
It is a challenge for us because we still have, we have many people who are tied to the school schedule, and so why it's funny. We just had a senior leadership team this morning, and right, it's June 18th, and one of the topics that we are having was actually the plans that we have to start making for offboarding for people starting to leave in mid-August. Uh,
Wow.
and what that means in terms of adjusting schedules. So the short answer is no. We are not able to be fully staffed to meet the changing visitation that is happening on the shoulder seasons, April, May, September, October, now well into November.
Wow. That's good and bad at the same time. It's great to see people getting out to enjoy the national parks, and hopefully a solution will come from Washington. Maybe Congress will provide you some more money to cover the bases. Recently you just came out with a State of the Park report, the glimpse of Grand Teton. Great report. I wish more parks would issue those kind of things because it really does help the user understand, what you guys are accomplishing and the challenges that you're facing. Talking about visitation, some of the points mentioned by the comments that you have received over the years: finding lodging that is not too expensive, the park being too crowded, long lines at entrance stations, not enough parking at trailheads in the park in general. All valid complaints. I've seen them. How do you where do you go with those? I mean, there's only so many spaces where you can put cars, for instance, and as you mentioned, there's a lot of trail use, a real increase in that.
Yeah, let me go back if you don't mind and start off like, thanks for the compliment on the annual report. We put this together in large part in direct response to both our employees, volunteers, community members, as well as also opinion leaders. And part of that is it's where we want to make sure that our employees and volunteers, that they understand how the work they do, no matter what that work is, whether they're IT specialists who have to do, computer logons for folks, or if it's custodians, or it's admin assistants who are helping to do payroll, or it's search and rescue rangers or entrance gate rangers. We want to help all of our folks understand how the work that they do directly contributes to the mission of the park and our goals and objectives. And then, of course, we need to be reporting out to stakeholders and to the American public about how we spend their funding in order to be able to manage the park. And so, we frequently tell people that managing a place like Grand Teton is a lot like managing a county, with some actually added things that you need to do. While we don't do building permits, we've got all of the natural and cultural resources work that we need to do. And so just trying to convey the complexity of what it means to manage a park like Grand Teton. And by no means are we unique. There are many units across the system that are similarly complex. And just like there are many units across the Park Service that are, being faced with the opportunity and the challenges of having millions of people come and visit when you've got infrastructure that is 75 years old and you've got growing shoulder seasons and limiting staff capacity, limited facility capacity. And yes, while you can experience things where you can have longer lines at entrance gates at Grand Teton, I would say compared to some places like Mount Rainier or Rocky or Yosemite.
Arches.
Yeah, right. We're not quite we are not close to the scale, right, that some of those parks are experiencing. And what we're trying to do is that we continue to be working with the National Park Service Visitor Use Management team that's based in Denver, and to look at what is being learned from parks literally from Acadia to Z, Zion, and everywhere in between, and what they've done. Part of what we've been working on has been following the interagency visitor use management framework. And in a few weeks here, we will be coming out for public review, public comment on the work that we've been doing in terms of looking at the desired visitor experiences across the park. And so the Grand Teton National Park had visitor experiences that were defined in our 1971 master plan, and they have not been updated since that time. And so over the last several years, we've been collecting a lot of research, a lot of analysis, holding public meetings. And the next phase of that is this informal process. It's not a formal NEPA process, but just seeking input from people about what we've heard so far on shaping some draft update to the visitor experience for the park.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that'll be fascinating to see. Getting back to the State of the Park report, I think I read in there that 43% of the respondents said that they somewhat or strongly agree that Grand Teton is too crowded. Um,
Um, yeah, not surprising, and it probably it depends on where folks are, right? If you are, and it depends on what folks' expectations are.
sure.
If you are looking for a day of solitude and you find yourself at Jenny Lake, you are, or what I should say, if you're looking for solitude and you find yourself at Jenny Lake between 8 in the morning and 6 in the afternoon, you're probably not going to feel a sense of solitude.
Not at
However,
all.
if you're there after 6 o'clock at night, actually solitude is relatively easy to find. Um, and it's an interesting thing about Grand Teton is that we are largely now a day use park where people are spend a night within a 2 or 3 hour drive of Grand Teton. They come in the morning between 8 and 10. They leave sometime between 2 and 4. And if you come in before that time or after that time, you actually can find solitude in most of the places in the park.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's obvious across many of the popular units of the park system. We're seeing more and more parks going to a timed entry system to try and balance out that use. Is that something that works for Grand Teton that you want to consider?
We are nowhere near that far along in terms of thinking about what other kinds of tactical tools we might be using in terms of managing day use visitation. But before we get to that, we need to be working with the public and stakeholders, people who care about this place, on understanding the range of visitor experiences that we're trying to provide here across Grand Teton, and where and the gap analysis in terms of where we may be falling short in terms of those places, and we need to be making and we might need to be considering what the alternatives are for changes. So
Yeah,
we are a ways out from talking about solutions. Though what I will say is, I think again, trying to learn from other parks, other industries, other places. I think we will be looking out in future years to see about, are there places where we might want to be piloting some things? Are there places where we might want to pilot different kinds of tactics? But where those places are and what those tactics are, don't know yet.
Yeah, yeah. People talk about lodging and finding inexpensive lodging or lodging that's not too expensive. One of the projects you've been working on, your staff, the future of Coulter Bay. And as you know from our past discussions, that's one of my favorite places in Grand Teton. And I've got my fall cabin booked already, so we're looking forward to getting up there. How's that project coming along?
We towards the end of last summer, fall, we were doing the first round of asking for public input, pre-NEPA work in terms of getting information from folks. We've been doing a bunch of social science information. We've been doing a bunch of kind of foundational resource studies to have a better understanding, of the conditions up there. And we look forward to that project going forward. We are having to slow that down a little bit because we've got a number of other projects that are underway in the park. Continued work on our Moose Wilson Road. We're going to be picking up a project at Taggart Lake in partnership with the Grand Teton Foundation. We have some planning work that we need to be able to be doing over at Mormon Row. And then just as we were talking about in terms of our visitor use management planning. And so, looking out over the next 24 months in terms of the staff capacity that we have with just some normal turnover, together with projects that are funded, we need to focus some of our efforts on some of these other nearer term things. And then we'll be picking the Coulter Bay planning project up here after a bit of a pause.
Can you put some parameters on that pause? Is it a 6 month pause or year long pause?
I would look at it as probably being a year. So, yeah,
Yeah.
hopefully not longer.
Never a lack of things for you guys to do.
It is a funny thing about many of our parks, not just Grand Teton, is at the same time that we have, um, you know, really, really immense challenges, we also can at times be overrun with opportunities. And, one of the challenges of being a superintendent and on the senior leadership team is really being intentional in trying to choose the opportunities that meet the best strategic direction for the park. And what most people don't realize is I probably spend 90% of my time saying no to things. Um, and a big reason that of saying no to stuff is just because we may not have the capacity to be able to move on it right now, because we need to follow through with the commitments that we have made that we need to, that we want to make happen. So.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's never easy. So, Chip, part of the State of the Park report, the glimpse of Grand Teton, that jumped out at me, ecosystem threat response and monitoring. In June 2023, biologists counted, it says, at least 25 pronghorn in the park. And that is down from an average of about 200 animals.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on there?
Well, what happened in not this past winter, but the winter before, we had a really big winter in Wyoming. There was a combination of weather events led to a very deep and persistent snowpack over a large geographic area. And part of that also was a very thick ice layer at the bottom of that snowpack. And so things like, Jackson Hole is a really tough place for animals to make a living. And so the majority of animals, kind of, they either hibernate or they migrate someplace else. And so the pronghorn and the deer, can migrate up to 100 miles away. Pronghorn come from down by Pinedale, deer come from by Pinedale and over from by the Wind River Reservation, up by Cody. And in particular, the winter down around Pinedale for what's called the sublet herd was just brutally tough. And Wyoming Game and Fish estimated that as much as 90% of both the pronghorn herd and the deer herd was wiped out by a combination of a heavy winter and disease. And so, when you see animals that face that kind of mortality at the other end of the migration, when they show up here, they're much fewer in number. So this, I think it's important to understand that on the one hand, we are all working to try to conserve these migration corridors. There's a number of things that we're doing, that many people are doing across the landscape. Wyoming Game and Fish, the Forest Service, private property owners, land trusts, others are working in terms of uh, fencing projects and habitat modification and wildlife crossings. But in addition to that, this has been happening for thousands of years where you have really, really tough winters and the animals, you get a large die off. And then over the next few years, with less browse, the habitat is much more robust and the animal populations will bounce back. And so we are optimistic that's what we will see with the deer and the pronghorn population.
Yeah, will there be a count later this summer?
There was actually a count this past weekend, was the first. That count, I don't have the results yet. Anecdotally, we were hearing that we were seeing substantially more pronghorn. But remember, they got to propagate, right? They've got to,
Sure.
and so we will have later on this summer, the biologists will do another survey for pronghorn that will specifically look for how many have bred.
Sure.
Yeah.
Great. One other thing that stood out in the ecosystem monitoring was tracking songbird populations across North America. And the Teton Science Schools there in Jackson Hole has operated a banding station in the park, one of the 10 longest running banding stations in the nation. How are your songbirds doing?
Yeah, well, I mean, actually, this is all across North America. We have seen a decline in migratory songbirds. That is not specifically unique here. Much of that is attributed again to their winter habitat in Central and South America being impacted, the loss of habitat at the other end of the migrations, our winter, their summer, having been reduced, translates into songbird populations decline here. The bird banding project is, in fact, actually, I think it's tomorrow that some of the bird banding work will pick up for the summer.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
Yep. But it does show, whether we are looking at, grizzly bears and wolves that move around on the landscape, or we're looking at pronghorn and deer that move around on, greater distance, or we're looking at songbirds that move even further distance. It's an important reminder that while we create these boundaries that are national parks where we're working to try to preserve these areas inside the boundaries, we are dependent upon the actions and the work that go on elsewhere in the county, elsewhere in the state, elsewhere in the country, and sometimes in other countries. And that's why stewardship of these places, that's why conservation of these places, not just up to the National Park Service, but it's up to the people who come and visit here and people who care about these lands. We all need to be working together.
Yeah, it's never easy, that's for sure. You mentioned grizzly bears, and of course, an ambassador for Grand Teton, if you will, has been grizzly number 399, one of the oldest bears in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Is she still around?
399 is around. She's got a 2-year-old cub with her this year. So she was seen earlier in May, somewhat regularly, but she has not been seen recently. And what our bear biologists tell us is that this is kind of consistent for her behavior in the past. She's very, very adept at being able to be kept off the radar screen when she wants to be stealthy. And it appears she's in a period of time where that's exactly what she's doing.
Yeah. And with 3.4 million visitors a year, being stealthy is a good trick for anybody to play in Grand Teton.
True.
And I think the bears have kind of figured that out by expanding their range in the park.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's pretty interesting in terms of It's not a joke to say that 15 years ago, even 10 years ago, if people visited Grand Teton and they said, "Hey, we're here. We want to see a grizzly bear. Where should we go?" The rangers will say, "Cool, drive up north through the south entrance of Yellowstone and go to the Hayden Valley." And
Hmm.
now, the interagency grizzly bear team says that we are an ecosystem that is full of bears. And so Grand Teton National Park, Jackson Hole, Teton County, we are in fully occupied grizzly bear habitat. And so what that means is, uh, I think we as a community continue to be learning and trying to come to grips with what does it mean to live in fully occupied grizzly habitat, because as recently as 10 years ago, that was not the case. Um, as we've said, or as I was saying, we have seen visitation change. And again, Grand Teton over the last 10 years, particularly over the last 5 years, has become a place now where certain parts of the year, certain times of the year, people can regularly and routinely see grizzly bears, particularly along roads. And we're now seeing, again, a change in behavior with visitors. We're seeing some visitors showing up and kind of setting up for the day at certain places on the road corridor with their coolers. We're actually even seeing people with barbecue grills, setting up to kind of base camp for the day to be able to watch for wildlife. And
Hmm.
that is giving us pause. That is giving us, we are thinking about, what might that be? Is that having an effect on the animals? How is that having an effect on other people? So it's another part of our visitor use management work that we're going to be digging into over the next couple of years. Of course,
Yeah.
we want people to see wildlife. We want people to be inspired by the animals, but it's also, you know, how do we do that in a way that we make sure is sustainable on the ecosystem as well as on the quality of the experience?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if you come up with an answer. I know Yellowstone has much of the same problem in the Lamar Valley, for instance, with looking for wolves, looking for grizzly bears, and the crowds that show up there. I've seen some photographs, and it's just incredible the throngs of people who gather, and especially if something pops up close to the road.
Yeah, yeah, and we at Grand Teton, we're very fortunate in terms of having a number of biological technicians who work for the park, but then we also have our wildlife brigade of volunteers who are out there every day, working really, really hard to try to help people have a high quality viewing experience while also protecting the animals and keeping people safe. And and it's this time of year, it's fun for me going up off duty, after work hours or on the weekends, and to be able to hang out with the volunteers for the wildlife brigade and just to be able to hear them as they are helping people try to learn more about the ecosystem, learn more about bears and the other wildlife that they see, as well as also then just how to recreate responsibly.
Yeah, yeah. Always a challenge again. Talking about wildlife and what people want to see, bison and elk, I'm sure, are always high on the visitors' checklist. And you guys are working with the National Elk Refuge to develop a new bison and elk management plan. What are you looking for in that area?
Well, what's going on there is that two challenges is that we collectively we all are faced with the challenge of having chronic wasting disease that in particular affects elk and deer. And chronic wasting disease is in some parts of the Rockies is very, very prevalent, like in Colorado. It is not very prevalent yet. It's present, but not very prevalent yet in this part of Wyoming. And the concern is that with the elk congregating in very high density in the winter when they're in the feed grounds, that chronic wasting disease may get a foothold and spread more quickly, uh, ultimately really having reducing the elk population. On the other hand, um, feeding elk, if the elk were not fed for part of the year at the elk feed grounds, they wouldn't have enough forage to live on. And so actually the population would decline as a result of not having enough food during the winter. So I think the way that we're seeing it is one way or another, whether or not the feeding of elk or chronic wasting disease, either one of those things are likely to drive down the elk population in this part of the world. And the question is really, a management decisions in terms of how to optimize the course of action that should be taken. Ultimately, the decision about how the elk feed grounds is managed is made by the Fish and Wildlife Service. The challenge for us is that decision will influence in terms of how the elk disperse across Grand Teton National Park and what we might need to do in terms of managing those.
Yeah. Well, you have to wonder about, what's the purpose of the feeding grounds? I mean, doesn't that generate a unnaturally high population of elk?
It's a pretty, it's a it was interesting for me in terms of hearing the stories back in the 1920s when, as was normal in the winter, elk that were malnourished were walking around in the town of Jackson, and the community residents in Jackson mobilized for emergency feeding of the elk. And ever since that time, I think there is this tension between people who are really well-meaning in terms of wanting to see healthy animals and how nature works, right? Either through predator-prey relationship or through not having enough food to eat. And that dynamic continues to play out to this day. And it will be interesting to see if the Fish and Wildlife Service decides to reduce feeding faster than they have been as elk start to spread out on the landscape looking for food, how people who live in this part of the world react to that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, obviously, if the incidence of chronic wasting disease goes up, that'll be a big factor, I would assume.
Yes, also, yep, very much so in terms of a population, the population of both deer and elk. That is also if I understand correctly, a human health concern too. So,
What about bison? Can they contract chronic wasting?
that is a great question, and I am not aware. I don't know the answer to that question. So,
Do you know why your visitors don't get as close to bison as they seem to do up in Yellowstone?
I think, I think, well, first of all, we have a lot fewer bison. We have about right 300 to 400 animals. Yellowstone has far more than that,
Yeah.
and as a result of that, the bison in Yellowstone get. Um, it is more frequent that they are close to the road, right? So yeah, the opportunity for people to get close to bison there is higher.
Yeah, yeah. Do you have more bears in Yellowstone, black and grizzly? It seems like there's more bear incidents coming from Grand Teton than Yellowstone.
Well, just given that we're so much smaller than Yellowstone, no, we don't have more. I think it's, the geography down here is so different from Yellowstone. We are, so much more open. The sagebrush, the density of roads and campgrounds and other facilities here are much higher than in Yellowstone. So just kind of where people are concentrated relative, and that you have longer sight distances may make it such that in some places it makes it a little easier to see bears.
Yeah, yeah. Another aspect of the glimpse of Grand Teton report was your historic properties management. And I know you've been working closely with the Grand Teton National Park Foundation over on Moore Monroe, and kind of a multi-pronged effort there to both preserve some of those beautiful historic structures as well as provide some employee housing.
Yep, that's right. And so Mormon Row is, it's a wonderful, really interesting story in terms of early Anglo settlers coming over here from Idaho to sent over by the Mormon Church to be able to homestead here. And it was really tough place to make a living. It's easy in this day and age with um, our central heat and electricity and internet and Amazon deliveries to underestimate how incredibly tough it was in order to be able to try to make a living on the landscape here. And so Mormon Row was a place that people settled in a consolidated fashion, and the remnants of the buildings out at Mormon Row are historically significant. So part of what we're trying to do is to create Mormon Row as more of a destination place, a place where when people go there, it's clear that there is meaning, that they have an understanding of why the National Park Service encourages them to go there, and to learn about early settler life here. And we have a number of important historic buildings out there, some of which are currently occupied as employee housing. It's one of the best way to take care of historic buildings is make sure that they're used. We did a renovation on the Pink House, which was the one of the landmarks out there. But that is not intended to be used. It was more to stabilize the structure. And then we were working on what's called the Roy Chambers House,
Right.
which in part with private philanthropy, we will be using to create more employee housing. In fact, I think it's 5 beds that will come out of the combination of the Roy Chambers house and garage. Last year, we worked with a house moving company, moved the house off its old, crumbling, decrepit foundation, removed that, created a new foundation, and moved the house back on it. And then this year, we start work on actually renovating the building itself.
That said, I can't imagine that that's going to solve your employee housing situation.
Not by itself. I mean, we are pursuing an all of the above approach for our employee housing. So we're in the process right now of building 6 new houses here in Moose. We're following the lead of Yellowstone, where these are modular homes that were built in a factory in Minnesota. Right in the homes, they've actually been completed there, where now that snow is off the ground, where the forms have been put up, and we're creating the foundations for them here. And sometime in August, the homes should be delivered and with cranes lifted and put on the foundations. Then, as I talked about at Mormon Row, we're adaptively reusing historic buildings to create employee housing. Of course, we continue to rent some apartments in town in Jackson that we rent to our employees, and rent to them for the rate at which government employee housing is rented, and then we pay the difference in terms of what the market rate is on those apartments. And we have a number of other buildings that we'll be looking at doing renovation work on to be able to create more housing here.
Yeah, yeah. No, I believe the report said that the Park Service should plan for approximately 95% of your employees needing government housing. And when the report was published, it said there was a shortfall of about 35 beds. Once you get these 6 houses up and running, any idea how much shortfall will be left?
Well, so we actually did that analysis of how many beds we needed. We did in 2021, 35 beds, and since that time we have, with the Moose House, the Mormon Row House, and other projects that we have in the pipeline over the next 3 years, we should be we should be on track for creating 20 new beds. So we'll still be somewhere between 10 and 15 beds short from what we project that we need. So, and as you pointed out, and I believe Grand Teton is very unusual. That we have to house 95% of our employees. Even parks like Yellowstone and Yosemite are not at that high a percentage. It's just given the private market situation here in Jackson Hole, it is just not possible for our folks to either find housing, or let alone or be able to afford it.
Yeah, yeah. No, pricing in Jackson is pretty crazy. As they say, the billionaires pushed out the millionaires.
Yep, that's right, and it's still going on.
Yeah, yeah. How does that affect going back to lodging? I know, somewhere along the line I saw something about $500 a night. I can't remember what facility it was, probably out at Jackson Lake Lodge. And we always hear that the Park Service has to consider comparable rates in the marketplace. When you look at Jackson Hole, the market rates are really high. And does that skew things? I mean, you said for the employee housing that the Park Service helps bridge the gap there for the employee to make the monthly rent. And yet the lodging in the park doesn't seem to have that assistance.
It is, there is no doubt about it, is that overnight accommodations in this part of the world, whether you're in lodging in the park or you are lodging in the local community, it's really expensive. And yeah, and that means, and on top of it is, generally speaking, we're a long way from people to travel here.
Yeah,
So, people are, um, we're at Yosemite or Rocky, where maybe people are coming up from urban areas that are a few hour drive away. Generally speaking, the visitation of people coming here, they're coming from a great distance, and so they are traveling for quite a while. And yeah, just hearing from the Travel and Tourism Bureau, it sounds like hotel rooms are again kind of reaching an all-time high in the community here, and the market seems to be bearing that. And it's expensive for people to visit.
yeah. Well, just because the Jackson market is reaching an all-time high, does that mean the park lodging has to mirror that?
Well, so it's an interesting thing. There was a policy change a couple of years ago that now at the national level that now allows the concessionaires to be able to charge comparable rates to what's going on in the local community. So we that policy has been implemented here, and that is a part in terms of how the rates are set for much of the concession facilities.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if that's not going to price some Americans out of visiting their national parks. One of the big things in the news recently was the landslide on Teton Pass.
Yeah.
Does that affect the park in any way? Do you have employees coming over from Driggs or Titonia?
Um, the effects for us are primarily secondary effects. Yes, we had two employees that lived on the other side of the pass, and so one has been able to telecommute and telework, and then the other we've been helping make temporary lodging here. But it's all through the community of Jackson Hole, where we're seeing the thousands of people that commute over the pass every day, that work in the grocery store, or work at the hospital, or work in the restaurants, or work in the construction industry. We have construction projects here actually that for several days the construction workers were not here because it didn't make sense for them and to be able to travel around. And so the entire community has been affected that way. The good news is we're hearing from Wyoming Department of Transportation is that they have completed the grading of the temporary bypass, and today they were going to start paving it.
Wow.
So there's a 2-lane temporary bypass. It'll probably be slower speeds going through it than normal driving, but hopefully in a few days here, that will open up and create some temporary relief for folks.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing that they're working at such a fast pace, and that's great to hear. I've driven that pass quite a few times. I can't imagine anybody speeding on that pass.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, it's as much as the focus has been on Jackson Hole and over here, I think actually where the real impact has actually been on the Idaho side, the Teton Valley, Idaho side, because
Mhm.
that's where you have thousands and thousands of people who who come to this side to work, and so they've not been able to come over and go to work, or they've been doing the drive around, and which adds uh,
Couple
75
hours, right?
$100 a day worth of travel costs, as well as just doubles or triples their commute time.
Yeah, yeah. No, be interesting to see what permanent solution they come up with, or long-lasting solution. One of the other things that jumped out to me as I was going through the glimpse of Grand Teton, um, a cute little dog dressed up, had eye goggles on and whatnot. Working dogs for conservation. What's going on with that?
We are very, very fortunate that we have a cadre of people, both who work for the park as well as also work in the community who have search and rescue dogs. And so we have animals here who help when a person is missing, to be able to help try to find them. And those animals work in a variety of different conditions, whether it's working for snow avalanches or working to help try to find people if they've been lost on a river or in a lake. So I have to say that specific picture, I don't know exactly what's going on with that photo.
Well, they were talking about using dogs to find invasive vegetation, salt cedar, pepperweed.
Yep, that's part of it. There are animals increasingly that animals are used to be able to help both with exotic species, whether they are vegetation or they are animals. And of course, when animals are, just like us, when animals are out working in the environment, you need to make sure that they have personal protective gear on. So, sometimes that means eye protection, sometimes that means protection for their paws.
Yeah, yeah. I wasn't sure if that was just a costume or what, but yeah, I know we've had dogs and ran across, I think somebody in Jackson Hole actually makes sunglasses for dogs, which is really interesting. Before we let you go, you were talking about paddling a little bit earlier. How's the snowpack? How's the level of Jackson Lake?
Jackson Lake has been full and full for a while. There's been a lot of water coming out of the dam into the Teton River. We are definitely past peak runoff, but there's still. I get one way to measure this is where's trail crew, right? Because trail crew is out working right up to the snow line in terms of cutting logs out and brushing back, and trail crew is still at the lower and mid elevations in terms of where they're doing their work. So
Just because the snowpack's that still holding on.
yeah, it is. And people are actually, I hiked up Garnet Canyon on Sunday, and passed a party of people coming down with skis that had just been up skiing on the Middle Teton. So
Wow. Wow.
yeah,
Well, that's good. We need that snowpack to hang around.
yep, that's right.
Well, Chip, thanks so much for making time. Any words of advice for visitors yet to come?
Yeah, it's like there are all sorts of wonderful national parks all over the place. Most people don't really realize that I think the figure is something like for 90% of Americans, there's a National Park Service unit within a 1-hour drive of you, and so it's not all just Denali, like behind your screen, or Grand Teton, places that it may take you several days to get to, but wherever you live in this country, we are fortunate enough that there are the people of the National Park Service are close to where you live, and they would love to see you on a weekend or an afternoon to be able to come and visit a park that is near you. So go to nps.gov, pull up the map, and see what National Park Service unit might be near you in your state.
And then scroll over to nationalparkstraveler.org and read a story about some of those overlooked gems.
There are, I can't tell you. There are amazing gems that are close to your backyard. Just takes a little bit of time to explore them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we just had a story on one of them, Cumberland Gap National Historical Park. Kind of straddles 3 states there, Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky. It's got some great history going back to Daniel Boone and Civil War history, and it's just a beautiful place.
Yeah, it's an interesting history and interesting ecological, there in terms of, great place to visit.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Chip, thanks again for making time today, and look forward to catching up down the road.
All right, Kurt. Thank you. Appreciate the support.
That's our show for this week. We hope you found it interesting. To find a copy of the Grand Glimpse of the Park, head to the park's website, www.nps.gov/GRTE, then click on the Learn About the Park for a drop-down menu, and then select News and then News Releases. You'll find it there. For The Traveler, this is Kurt Repenchek. See you in the parks.
The composers and musicians at Orange Tree Productions have created a unique collection known as the National Park Series that has grown to include more than 30 CD titles. Composed against the backdrop of a park's sounds of nature, these musical scores will connect you with these beautiful places and take you there, at least in your mind. This collection is the #1 selling National Park audio series in the world and provides the background music for National Parks Travelers podcasts. Visit them at orangetreeproductions.com. Editing and production work for the National Parks Traveler podcast is done by Splitbeard Productions. You can learn more about us at splitbeardproductions.com. National Parks Traveler is a 501c3 nonprofit media organization that provides daily editorial coverage of national parks and protected areas. Traveler's coverage is made possible by reader and listener donations. Visit us at nationalparkstraveler.org.